Okay, we will start now. Okay, so I'm really sorry about that. We're just restarting, and we're restarting. We're just going through the different ways of insulating a building, a home, and we've been talking about external wall insulation, and we're just moving on to windows now. So we talked about internal and external wall insulation, and obviously we have windows as well, which if you're looking at external wall insulation, I'd really recommend thinking about windows at the same time, because obviously they're integral. If you're moving out the wall, then you'll need to extend the coving, the sills of the windows as well, and all that sort of thing. Triple glazed windows are a recommendation, and we, where possible, use wooden timber framed windows, which are fantastic for quality and you can maintain. Obviously, there's a price impact there. So if you can't, then good quality triple glazed plastic, or even good quality double glazed, are better than poor quality double glazed that maybe have become shot over the years, you know. So yeah, there are different ways here. We've got a fact sheet all about windows, actually, happy to share. But yeah, triple glazed windows, certainly very comfortable. And then we'll look at things like heating systems as well. I suppose insulation, I should mention, you might insulate the floor in a number of ways. It depends what type of floor you have. You might insulate the ceiling, the roof, the loft, depending again like on your circumstances and what you want to do. We also have heating systems, and this is a heat pump, and there's a lot of excitement these days about heat pumps. We went to Ireland because although there are heat pumps in the UK, they're much more advanced in Ireland in terms of their rollout, and there's a lot of learning they've done that we can usefully utilise here. And we've got a couple of webinars coming up on heat pumps. We haven't advertised them yet, but we're just sorting the dates now. One thing I would say with heat pumps, without going into too much detail, is really the heat pump system needs to be aligned with good insulation and air tightness. They work well at a low level, but you don't want to strain them too hard and kind of have them to do too much work. Again, I won't go into too much detail, but they work a bit like a fridge. But in reverse. So a fridge kind of expands air and it draws heat out of the fridge, cooling it. This works the other way. You kind of compress heat using a small electric fan, and in doing so you gain kind of the energy from compressing the heat. But yeah, they're really interesting, and they're utilised a lot in Ireland and other places. Ventilation. This is something that you wouldn't necessarily think of as a retrofit improvement, but it is so important to have a ventilation strategy that goes with these other things. If you're insulating your home, if you're making it really airtight, if you're plugging all the gaps and everything like that, you're naturally reducing airflow there. And you don't want to be in a situation where water vapor is building up from cooking and washing and just breathing in and out. You want to be able to breathe clean, fresh air and have a managed ventilation strategy that's commensurate with the amount of energy that you're using as well. This system's Air Eco. There are other people out there, but they specialise in doing fans that work in a retrofit context. Some of these are different types, but some of them are very low level on a lot of the time, or continuous, and they're just making sure that there's like a continuous level of air change there. There are some passive systems as well that don't have any electric fans in them at all. They're just working passively. So yeah. So retrofit is real, it's happening, it's out there and people are doing it, and it has real impacts and real savings. We ran a program a few years ago now, Community Green Deal, where we did large-scale retrofit for a number of houses across Greater Manchester. We were lucky enough to be able to offer 0% interest loans for this particular program, and across this we saw gas savings of 50%. So all these properties had boilers. Maybe when we're doing it now, we're thinking about heat pumps rather than boilers, but at the time This project was all about boilers. So 50% reduction in heating, 60% reduction in carbon savings, average bill savings of nearly £1,000 a year, which gives you an idea of the scale of reduction there, and net bills of £280. These properties had a little bit of supplement from the feed-in tariff on their bill savings, so able to take that into account. But yeah, large bill savings, large quantities of energy saved, and for me, this is the kind of levels we need to be at in terms of meeting the challenge of climate change. So it's possible it happens. The average spend on this programme was £40,000 per property, which might be seen as quite a lot, but in the context of some other household purchases, cars and loft conversions, kitchens, puts it in a different context. This is a whole house retrofit. It's also an investment in the home and the property over time. And you don't have to put in £40,000 or other ways of making savings there, I would emphasise. So yeah, there's an example here of some of the heating demand reductions there. The blue is the before and the red is the after. And there's this graph tells a bit of the story about the modelling beforehand and afterwards and whether you achieve what you think you will. But yeah, fantastic results there. One of our householders, Dom, has been tracking his energy use for the last 20 years, which is pretty amazing. But he had the retrofit in 2016, and he was able to, or 2015, he was able to track some of the reductions here. So the red is the temperature after the retrofit and the blue before, and this is over the course of a day, and it's in his living room. He's got sensors in his living room, and it shows that before the retrofit, it would tend to be, it would get colder in the mornings, and it would get, there would be more variation basically. And after the retrofit, with the insulation added, he had internal and external triple glazed windows, a few other things as well. A lot more stability there. This graph is really interesting. This is his graph from 2003 to 2015, and it shows that it shows his gas use over time and steadily dropping over the years. I think the thing to take away from this is that he took relatively small measures and improvements himself. He did some internal wall insulation himself in his living room. He converted the loft and got a contractor to do that. He went under his floor and did some insulation there, replaced a few windows, but getting small scale contractors in to do the work or do some himself. Did some secondary glazing, that's adding another sort of pane of glass to existing single glazing. And then he had the carbon cork retrofit, which was towards the end of that journey. And I suppose the takeaway there is that he saved as much in 6 weeks of work as he had done in the previous 10 years. So there's two ways to go about it. There's incremental over time, and there's big bang, or you can mix and match them together. The things that I've shown you and the £40,000 figures, you don't have to just do that all in one go. For me, the advice would be to have a plan and just to go through the plan steadily over time. Like Dom and stuff. So some questions we're gonna address them. So basic grounding in what retrofit is, and now we're gonna think about some things about setting out, because those things sound great, but how do I go about it? Where do I start first? What we're gonna do is think about three things. One is like your brief, where you start from, what you're trying to achieve. The second is your budget. How's the money shaping up? How are you going to spend it? And the third is how you're going to procure the work. Who's going to do the work? How are you going to get it done? So it's time for our second poll. So we're going to ask now, what are your motivations? Because when we're starting out, that's what it's all about, thinking about where we're starting from. And your motivations are all about that. So you should be able to see our second poll. So it's your motivations. Why do you want to retrofit your home? And we have a number of things here, and you can click on as many as you want. But it includes, it might be about carbon emissions, might be about energy bills, could be about a number of things. So if you'd like to start voting now, Fantastic. Give it a few more seconds. Hopefully people got their head around the polls now. Okay, I will share the results. So that's really interesting. This is it's really interesting, I think, because when we talk to policymakers, people in government, local and national government, or people that have been in the industry a long time, they always tell us that people will only retrofit their homes because it's good for their finances. It's all about their finances. And I think what we always find when we talk to people, actually the people most likely to do retrofit, to carry out retrofitting and do stuff, is they tend to be people that are motivated by other things, not just money, although money is clearly part of the process as well, a factor there. So here we've got the primary reason, nearly, everyone but one person who voted chose carbon emissions and that climate change impact. That is why we're Carbon Corp set up. But it's also about making the home more comfortable, a more pleasant place to live, maybe opening up new spaces, new parts of the property. Also about energy bills and that finance aspect being a part of it as well. Next on the list we have add to the property value, so it's like investing in the property. And around a third of the people as well chose protect my home from future weather events and climate change. This is something that when we started out 10 years ago didn't really factor in the responses that we got, but increasingly it is one of the primary things, like usually third or fourth on the list. And that's both, that's unfortunate, but also is a good reason to invest in property in that sense. I didn't really touch on it, but Dom's temperature readings, he's also taken some in summer, and it shows, and we've had particularly few hot summers, or at least weeks or months, a few weeks periods in summers where it's got particularly hot, and the insulative effect has the reverse effect of keeping the heat out, actually. And you're in a strange situation of like closing the windows when it's hot. You don't want to let the hot air in. So we have health in there as well, and improving the fabric of the home. So yeah, fantastic. Get rid of the polls. Okay, so this is the same kind of survey, and it's quite similar results, actually. Although, as I said, because it's historic, it misses out some of those things we had in that. But what I want to say is that your brief, where you're starting out your priorities, will affect what you do to the house and what the measures are you go for. Okay, so so the bars of the graph, which are what people want to do, we've annotated them with, if this is your priority, these are the things you would do. So, for example, save money is the first bar. If you're interested in saving money, the first thing you might do is fit a new boiler. These days, maybe gas boilers are kind of beyond the pale, so maybe gas boilers are not the thing to do anymore. But boilers, if you've got a poor performing boiler, it's cost effective. Insulation, you get bang for your buck there, and air tightness work, sealing up any gaps and drafts and what have you, save quite a bit of money off your bills. If it's carbon, then insulation is key, really, to reduce demand. First and foremost, air tightness is also useful, and heat pumps, as we've talked about, a lower carbon form of heating, for example. If it's modernisation, maybe it's about insulation and PVs and smart home technologies and that sort of thing. If it's about improving air quality, then it's ventilation is part of that, alongside the insulation, to make sure that the home is comfortable and warm and good for the health. And if it's about comfort, again, it's about insulation, air tightness, and things like windows have a huge effect. So as you can see, there's quite a spread here. What your priorities are will dictate the path you go down. It's also worth thinking when you're putting together your brief, retrofit project brief at the start, think about whether you're combining this with other things. For example, this householder chose to upgrade their kitchen at the same time as they were doing the retrofit. Quite a number of people recently have come to us and they wanted to extend their property, an extension, and think, right, I'll do extension, I'll make it, I'll build it to really high standards, but how can I use that time and the work that's going on to do the rest of the house at the same time, or some of the house? What are your values? What sits behind, these kind of motivations? Are you looking for very natural materials? Are you a high-tech person, an early adopter? Is it about the aesthetics and how things look, or is it about the health of the home and reducing kind of noxious substances and what have you? So putting together what your values are, again, will then have a knock-on effect about the route you go down. So that's one aspect of putting a brief together. Another is your budget as well. And so the first word there is be realistic. And so if you've got a fixed budget, it's important to be realistic about what you can achieve with that. And it's important to hold contingencies back. Especially at the moment with the economy, a lot of uncertainty there. We may see price fluctuations in terms of labour and materials as well. So when you're starting out, you're planning, you've got a certain amount of money, it's worth having these contingencies. Money that you set aside that you're not going to spend, or potentially works that you set aside and you think, yeah, I'll do these things if I can, and this if I can't, then I'll leave that. Think about financial return. If you're paying back a loan, or finances are tight, or you really need to get a bang for your buck, it might be worth doing some work around assessing the payback of the measures. How much money, how much impact will you have on bills? How much money could you save? Do that calculation. And funding is something that isn't necessarily out there, although there is things like renewable heat incentives. Often it comes with strings attached. PV panels as well, you can get smart export guarantee. So there are some bits of funding out there, relatively minimal at the moment, but things may change on that front. But often there are strings attached. You might need to go down a certain approved contractor scheme, and that might limit the type of contractors you might want to use, and might limit the materials you might want to use as well. So it's worth thinking about. And how are you going to procure the work? I think it's really important. This is kind of a formulation that might be familiar to some from other types of projects. That we have a balance here between time, cost, and quality. So you can do a project cheaply, you can do it well in terms of quality, and you can do it quick. But you can't do all three at the same time. That is an unfortunate law of reality. So the kind of takeaway lesson here is that where's the trade-off going to be? So if you've got the budget, you can do things to good quality, you can do them fast. It will be relatively pricey, not necessarily astronomical, but it means you pay for that. You can do things relatively cheap and to good quality, but they'll necessarily be slow in how you do that. You'll probably need to take time to learn things yourself, take on some skills, or maybe just take time to procure, select the right contractors to do this. And of course, you can always choose to do things cheap and fast, but the natural result of that is that the quality will suffer. But we all make our choices. But it's really important to have a think about this in this context, because I think often when we come into these projects, we think, oh, we want it all cheap, fast, and good, and compromises need to be made. Also, really, the takeaway from that, if you were thinking about quality as an issue, is that is important. The measures we're talking about, they can really make huge improvements, radical improvements to the quality of our housing, to the fabric of the housing, to how it is to live in the home as well. Done badly, done cheaply and fast, it can have lasting impacts as well in a negative way. This is some examples of poor external wall insulation where they've left gaps basically. And if you leave a gap in the insulation, it tends to form a cold spot. And on the other side, you can get water condensing onto those cold spots. You can see things like mold and what have you. Not nice at all, unfortunately. So quality can be achieved, but it's just worth keeping an eye on things, making sure people don't nail things to the wrong thing or leave big gaps and what have you. As I say, this is something that's really is very high profile in the industry now, and there are some standards out there, not just for the quality that should be achieved, but for the process in how it should be achieved, in the sense of the design and planning that goes in beforehand, either by a contractor or by an architect or by other people that do the work. So yeah, there's a lot of work being done on quality. And it's worth understanding the performance gap. Performance gap is the idea that when a scheme is designed, a project is designed, people can sometimes be quite optimistic about savings that are going to be made, and they don't pay attention to the detail of how the improvements are done on site. And that's why, in theory, this measure will have a really big impact, but as built, it hasn't. Why is that? And often it's down to disjunct between who's designed the process and who's building it, and the oversight to make sure that contractors are properly trained in the techniques that they're delivering and what have you. So it can be an issue, but not always as well. And there's some good literature out there, and the evidence from our schemes about how we can overcome that. How are you going to procure the work? In packages, or as one big lump. If you're thinking about the different works you're having done, the budget you're having them that you've got to play with, would you do things one step at a time, or like Dom over those 10 years, or would you do them all in one big go? There are pros and cons to those. Disruption of doing them all in one big go, but you get it all done with and you have a big impact to start with. Or you can spread it out over time, but obviously, coming back to it. And what kind of trades are you going to use? What kind of contractors? Are you going to go down the DIY route? And there's nothing to say you can't do that. We run a lot of courses, and other people run courses in how to do things, yourself. Whether it be simple air tightness work or things like, we've run some really popular sessions in using hemp and lime plaster recently. So there are some things you can do yourself. Obviously, you might not want to be fitting windows or things like that, or external wall insulation. So you might want to use mainstream contractors. There might be local contractors that you might have worked with in the past that you trust and know, and might just need a little bit of extra skills or a bit of understanding to get into something. Or there might be people that you contact locally and you've had recommendations. There are also specialist contractors, retrofit contractors out there. There's a network called the AECB, Association of Environmentally Conscious Builders, AECB, and they're a really good place to find specialist contractors. What I would say is the specialists tend to be quite busy and fairly specialist, because that's what they are. So there is a range of options for this. So what are the qualities of a good builder? And I think it's worth thinking about the builders you may have used on your home in the past. Would you recommend them? Could you get recommendations from other people? That's really, there's other ways to find contractors that we'll talk about. But what we don't do at Carbon Corp is have a list of contractors that say, oh, just here's a list, go with these people. Usually because there's not that many of them, and often because performance can change over time. And what I would say as well is a good contractor for one person and one job might be quite different to a contractor for a different job. Contractors tend to specialize in certain areas, whether it be certain scale of building works or property, or certain types of work, such as insulation or roof works or what have you. So we don't just say that here you go, because you might choose a contractor that isn't appropriate for the task you want. And also, if we were to do this, we need to accredit them. It's costing, time consuming. Instead, what we do is give people the skills and the capacity to procure contractors themselves, or to skill up the contractors they're already working with, because that's basically the effective way to build the number of contractors we have doing this work. Okay, so we've looked at what goes into a brief, really, and this is, if any of you are thinking of starting out on this journey, as it should in the poll to begin with, these are the things to think about. What's your brief? What are your priorities? Are you bringing in other contracts, other projects? What are your values? What's your philosophy? What's your budget? Is it fixed, or can you be flexible? Have you got a contingency in there? Where's the money coming from, and does that place certain constraints on what you want to do? How are you going to procure the work? What's your compromise in terms of time, cost, and quality? What types of contractors might you use? And how are you going to deal with disruption that might entail in this work? And that, if you put these things together into a brief, that's what you do. That's what you can give then to people that are going to work on your project, whether that be contractors or specialist advisors. We've got a little brief template. We're very happy to send that out and for you to do what you want with that. But yeah, we also run green open homes tours, and there are a number around the country as well that are being run. And these are excellent questions to ask householders as you go around different homes, to ask them about. So a little bit about Carbon Co-op before we get onto the Q&A, which I know people are dying to do. I've seen questions in the chat. So as an organisation, we do a lot of awareness raising. We run green open homes tours and visits to houses that maybe work is ongoing, or also they're finished, and you go and see what happened, talk to the householders and get a really good idea of what the works they did and how they got on. We also run training sessions as well in a whole variety of different qualities associated with retrofit. So yeah, everything from very simple things like the beginner's guide up to things like navigating the construction industry and thinking about ventilation and thinking about air tightness work and all that sort of thing. We've got all these on our website if you're interested, and we're running lots of webinars now. And here's a property in South Manchester. We did bus tours for quite a while, where we take people around en masse, so it's a really nice way to meet other people, do the same thing. Hopefully one day we'll be able to run these again. I might do virtual visits. We now have an extensive webinar program to support people doing stuff in their own homes or in different parts of the UK. The website link is here, and I'll also email this out at the end as well. But there's loads of different things on there now, from quite specialist retrofit kind of case studies, quite detailed 2-hour-long sessions, to other things about quite simple things around kind of home health checks and going around the property and understanding what is or isn't kind of wrong with things. So do check that out. It's a resource for everyone to use. So in the chat, we get to the stage where we have Q&A, but are there ways that we can help you to retrofit your home? Do put them in the chat, and we can come back to them either now in the session or afterwards. And there are some things that we do offer. We use My Home Energy Planner, which is our assessment and decision-making tool for householders. It's an energy model that we use, and we send assessors to people's homes. They assess the energy performance of the homes at the moment, and then we create scenarios for improvement over time, which are costed. So yeah, you can see exactly the kind of measures that you would need to install that are appropriate for your home, and the kind of order and packages you might do. And we always include a kind of final scenario, which is everything you need to do to retrofit your home. Not everyone can do that, and that's fair enough, but it's important to see where you might go, or you might go there over time as well. So that's My Home Energy Planner. That's a service we offer in Greater Manchester, but increasingly around the UK. And we also have People Powered Retrofit. This is an end-to-end service that we offer for householders. This is limited to Greater Manchester and the surrounding area, I'm afraid. But we offer advice, assessment, design, quality assurance, and help with procuring contractors. We're also training contractors in the Greater Manchester area, and evaluation and handover at the end. So this is a service we've been piloting for the last 6 months, 9 months now, and we're going to be extending it this year. But we're really happy to share the learning from this with other groups in other areas as well. And do visit our website. We've got loads of reports and publications as well as all the webinars. So yeah, do check that out. Okay, we're at the end of the session, so I'm going to open up the Q&A. Maybe I will stop the share as well, so it makes it a little bit easier. So Jeff, I'm going to allow you to talk, so you can ask your question. Can you hear us, Jeff?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm just going to have to hang on. Is that better? Can you?
Oh, we can hear you perfectly. You're coming over loud and clear.
I just changed my microphone to one that works, hopefully.
Yeah, it works really well. Do you want to ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Maybe you can't hear us. Okay, we can hear you, Jeff.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, the microphone in my laptop has broken, so I had to put the earphones in.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So my problem is we've got a quite difficult to retrofit in terms of an insulation job house because it's Georgian. You know, it's got solid walls, lots of sort of nooks and crannies and odd features about it. It's also a listed building, so we wouldn't be able to fit external insulation.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, yeah, but we've got to do something. So my first step has been we were just waiting actually because of lockdown. We put a deposit down on air source heat pump just before lockdown. But my sort of issue really is, I know it's very interesting, the poll earlier, which indicated that actually what motivates people are doing this is not so much the financial return, and I will put myself in that category too. But it has occurred to me that, say you do your heat pump, that's your first step, as I've done, then what that then does is kind of push out the payback period for any retrofit insulation you do, because you've already kind of, well, if you're doing it on a sort of carbon footprint basis rather than a financial basis especially, you've already sort of halved your carbon footprint. So it's a kind of a law of diminishing returns. And I just wonder what you would say about that.
Yeah. What part of the country are you from, Jeff?
We're just south of Cambridge.
Oh, right. Fantastic. We were in Cambridge last year, and there is a nascent Cambridge retrofit group there. So do get in touch with them. And there's some interesting architects there. What I would say is it's really, really important with the air source heat pump to reduce demand as much as possible. And I totally understand that a Georgian house is going to be it's going to be tricky, but there are lots of air tightness things you could do to do that, and potentially things loft and floor. Obviously, I don't know your house, and I wouldn't offer a specific advice. But it's important to try and reduce demand as much as possible, because that goes hand in hand with the heat pump. There is definitely a kind of a mathematical, if you like, kind of computation there about taking as much of the carbon savings as quickly as possible, and that then that means that the later measures are kind of harder to justify in carbon terms alone. But I would say is that to think of your house as a system, think of it as a kind of the fabric of the house. and that installing and improving the fabric will have a relatively smaller effect after you've done the big things, but it will have just a beneficial effect in living in the house, living in the property, and the life of the house as well. The life of the fabric.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting to hear how you get on, and do share experiences with us, and with the Cambridge group as well. I can send you a link to those.
That would be fantastic.
If you don't know them already, yeah. Thank you, Jeff.
Much.
And we've also got Julia. Hi, Julia. I've allowed you to unmute, so you have to. Let's see. I think you have to do that yourself.
Hello.
Hi there. You're right.
Hello. Sorry, I was multitasking.
That's lockdown life for you, isn't it?
Yeah. Cooking a chickpea and spinach curry in the kitchen. I just rushed back in. I was just wondering. I think you might have answered that actually to the last person. He was saying that external insulation is a no-go with Georgian House because it's listed, but I guess actually maybe not so completely answered, because what about buildings that aren't listed? Would they need planning permission? And are they making a fuss about that kind of thing, even though we're in an emergency situation?
Whereabouts do you live, Julia?
I'm in Harrogate right now.
Right, yeah, nice,
Yeah.
Very nice.
Okay.
Nice part of the world. Yeah, I mean, okay, so let's just take it as read. External wall insulation, do you need planning permission per se? And the answer is not necessarily. And within wherever you live, the planning authority will have permitted development rules. Those are modifications you can make to your house that don't require planning process, and they'll be fairly well set out. And if you're under any confusion, do engage with your planning authority first and foremost. So yes, so it may not need that. Often the planning authorities get very concerned if there is a material change to the aesthetics of the property, and I think we might have had a question beforehand as well on this. External wall insulation that maybe is permitted development per se, it might be the planners get involved on that, and you have to make a justification basically to say, look, it is permitted development, and it is under these rules as well. So there may be limitations. Again, it depends on the visual appearance of your property, on the external stuff. What I would say is, in Salford area of Manchester, we retrofitted a property that dated from the 1700s and was in a conservation area, and we were able to meet all the concerns of the planning authority there, and it sailed through relatively simply. What we did in that instance was keep at the front elevation, it was internal wall insulation, and at the side it was external. So that meant that the planning authority were happy that people aren't going to see the side, and they were more concerned about the windows at the front, basically, and we could do that relatively simply. So yeah, not necessarily, basically, Julia, is the answer, and it is dependent, I'm afraid, on your property, but it's a good question. Okay, Sue, we have a question from Sue. I will unmute you, or will allow you to talk. You need to unmute yourself. You've got a question about underfloor insulation. And whilst you need to unmute yourself, Sue, if you could do that. Otherwise, I'll ask a question for you. But Ian makes a very good point on listed buildings. Please take the advice of a conservation architect or conservation officer before undertaking works. All parts of listed buildings and its settings are protected, not just the facade. Check the Bath Preservation Trust for advice on upgrades to Georgian listed buildings. RIBA, which is the Architects Royal Institute of British Architects, I think, hold the register of conservation architects, and often hold Ask Architect sessions, which are cheap and free. So that's fantastic advice from Ian. Sue asks, I'll ask for you, Sue, what is the best insulation to use for the underfloor? Underfloor insulation is a complex and sometimes difficult area. One of the simplest ways, let's start with the simplest ways, you can extend the external wall insulation under the level of the floor on the outside, and that will have an insulative effect on the floor, which is, you wouldn't think particularly at first, but actually when we've modelled it and actually done it, it does have an effect, and you don't need to get involved in the floor. If the floor is suspended timber, and you can get underneath there, either through a basement or through crawling, which parts of Manchester is to a greater or lesser extent comfortable. There are ways then to get underneath the floor and put internal insulation underneath it. What I would say is it's important to be really careful about how you do that insulation and the particular circumstances of your underfloor, because there have been instances where people kind of trap moisture or create moisture points of cold bridges, as we've said, and that can obviously damage the fabric of the joists underneath the floor. So there are lots of different ways to approach it. If it's a solid floor as well, there are different ways there. You might want to build it up on top, suspend a floor above it and put insulation under there. So lots of different ways to do a floor, and there are some things to watch out for. So yeah, be careful. Jeff and Ian are having more discussions in the Q&A, so that's good. We had a couple of people with raised hands. Let's see, James. Okay, James Brass, I'll allow you to talk.
Hi, Jonathan. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Perfect.
Hey. Oh, thanks very much for spending time with us this evening, despite the glitches.
Yeah, it's thanks for coming. Yeah, sorry about that.
It's been a really good webinar. It's been really clear. Thank you. I just got a question about your last couple of slides about the home retrofit service and the home energy surveys that you do for people. I was just interested in the sort of people that you're getting referring through to you, and a bit more about their motivations and how they kind of financing some of these retrofits.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really interesting actually. So a little bit of perspective. So we've been doing the assessments for 8 years now, and we developed them from a relatively simple spreadsheet to a more complex online tool now. And with the service has been going for 9 months now, and we've been assisted from Bays, who department of the government there, to help, and what they've done is a small funding pot to try and help create new retrofit markets around the country. And in doing that, we did a lot of research into the people, the types of people that commission works and that enter the service. Now, in terms of the people there, they tend to be different types of people. They tend to be community-minded and live in distinct communities with low barriers to services. They kind of live in traditional towns, either on the edge of cities or in inner cities. And they're people, we've talked about the motivations before, but they're, in terms of budgets, we found, at least until recently, that people had access to finance, because finance is really cheap at the moment, and the average budgets that people had were around £30,000 to £40,000. Again, that's not to say that everyone has to go down that route. There are different ways to do it as well. And in terms of the assessments we've done, people pay around £500 for those, so they're not necessarily that cheap, but in the context of significant amounts of work they might do, they're kind of commensurate with that. We've done over 120 of those today, and they're people that are very likely to progress works, to some extent or other. And again, the motivations are around like climate change and improving their homes and doing something there. And I would say, James, there's a fantastic report online, People Powered Retrofit, that includes a lot of this information. So I would have a look at that, and that will hopefully help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, and we have Sorry, it's whizzing through all these. Jack, you had your hand up as well. Sue says she has no microphone. Sorry to hear that.
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, for taking the time out. Great talk. So my question is a slightly different one, around the kind of scale of change we want to see maybe nationally. And it'd be great to hear some of your work and some of your thinking on how you would attack that kind of retrofitting problem at a kind of national or even neighborhood scale, getting beyond one house.
Yes, and also Jemima in the chat says, if the government's going to invest in retrofitting as part of the green recovery, how should they spend their money? And I think this is really important. This time last year, a year ago, we did our AGM was all about a Green New Deal and housing. And I think our position is, yes, let's invest in large-scale improvements to our housing, but let's not repeat some of the mistakes that governments have made in the past. Where I briefly touched on some of the horror shows of works that were done basically at very large scale using very large companies, some of which, like Carillion, are no longer with us because the business model they operated wasn't sustainable or replicable, and where quality was kind of reduced, basically at the cost of to save money. What we think is that money should be invested at a local level on a mass, across the country, but a local level, investing in trusted intermediaries like cooperatives and community energy groups and local authorities, and looking for what they call the RMI sector, refurbishment, maintenance and improvement. These are people already doing work on our homes that we trust to come into our properties and build extensions and loft conversions and new kitchens and bathrooms and what have you. These are trusted local contractors that we know where they operate, and if there are problems we can go and seek them out. But it's on that level that we should be doing this. There's an organisation, CLES, that some people may have heard of, that really focus on community wealth building, and that's around investing in local infrastructure and local supply chains. And I think in the past, likes of Carillion would come into an area, they would do a scheme relatively poorly, they would hire on very short-term contracts poorly skilled people, and they would leave, and they would leave a legacy of nothing really, of kind of despair and poor works. And so, we need to avoid those mistakes. So that's my little rant. So about government, what we can do. Okay, we've come to the end of the webinar. We've got two questions from Jeff and from Kieran, which are very specific. And what I will do is answer those after the chat. But I live in Northern Ireland, Kieran, which is fantastic. I was over there, and there's a great retrofit architect, Tom Woolley, there, who's a force of nature, who maybe I can put you in touch with there. Yeah, obviously, I'm not going to give very specific advice on a webinar because, as it was Ian pointed out, it's not appropriate because I don't want you to do something that damages your house irrevocably. So what I will say is thank you for everyone for coming on to the webinar. I hopefully got through as many of your messages as I could do. Very shortly after the webinar, the two bits of the webinar will be going online, and I'll circulate the presentation and the video and a really short questionnaire just to give us some feedback on how we've done. I would really love to see that. So I'd like to thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Good evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and goodbye.